مشهدية ونحن في قلب المستوطنة. تمكن المقاتلون هنا من الاشتباك بشكل مباشر خلف المستوطنين.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to you all. I have made a speech, and I don't know how much of it I'm going to be telling you from my speech, because as days go by, my thoughts definitely evolve with other thoughts. And today, especially today, it's a month. Today is November 7th, exactly a month that from October 7th, the dreadful day we have experienced in Israel. I would like you all to stand for 20 seconds in silence for the memory of the lost ones. You may be seated. Most of you know of my past as an Israeli, American, and my dedication to our heritage and to the Jewish future. I'm here today with a very heavy heart. I'm outraged, saddened, and disbelieved. I was in Israel on October 7. At 6:50 a.m., when I began hearing sirens from afar, a sound that is not unfamiliar to me, then the sirens sounded in Tel Aviv. The first instinct I had was to write to my children here in America and to my colleague, Benjamin, who was also in the US, to tell them about the sirens. I didn't know at that point how dreadful that morning would be. As minutes passed, I realized this was unlike anything else we'd ever experienced in Israel. I have lived through the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, and I had served in the First Lebanon War. This was by far worse. I want to share with you all, as one citizen of Israel and the US, I'm shaken like all of you here as a result of the massacre we experienced, the kidnapping of our people, the raping of our women, and the murder of innocent civilians. Hamas are murderers. They are beasts that need to be wiped from the face of the earth. What took place on October 7 happened thousands of miles away from America. But we all went through unbearable pain. I want you to understand that this evil can happen here in our communities. And if you are not going to brace yourself and take action now, in 10 years, our American Jewish life will look like modern Europe Jewish life. For 13 years, since I started my work with Our Soldiers Speak, and now with the Miriam Institute, I've warned about the Jew hatred that exists on too many campuses. We must win the fight for our children's freedom on campuses. We must not support the universities that bash our younger generation. We must not give money to those campuses, and we must not give them that thing that is most dear to all of us, our children themselves. These universities are not worthy of hosting our children. The hatred we witnessed on October 7 must never happen again. It must never happen in Israel, nor here in America. Over the course of past month, I have traveled through Israel. I have met thousands of soldiers. I want you to know there is no fear amongst our soldiers. There is only motivation and belief that Israel is our land, and we will fight with all that we have to bring shalom al Israel. I thank you all for coming here today. Thank you to our guests, Doron and Gal, who traveled all the way from Israel to share their personal story. To Bret and to Amir Tibon, who will be bringing us some of their insight and experience on the situation. To Richard, who helped make this day happen, and to Dan Bartfeld for so generously sponsoring this evening. I also thank you, Benjamin, without whom all that we do would not be possible. I want to also thank my children, my closest family, who let me be in Israel and understood the need that I had to stay there, to help, to be involved, and to help myself, because they knew I could not be here while my country, my beloved country, my beloved people are going through the horrors that they've been going for the last month. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to see our extended program.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Just to give you the run of the evening, we're going to talk about a number of subjects. We're going to begin with a dialogue between me and New York Times opinion columnist Bret Stephens. He's going to talk about the situation here in the United States. After that, we're going to pivot, and we're going to begin with a conversation of salvation in the midst of the horrors with Amir Tibon. He'll be joining us by Zoom. Thereafter, we'll be hearing about the murder that took place, by the words of Doron, who is going to talk about the slaughtering of his family there on October the 7th. And thereafter, we will meet with an individual, Gal Gilboa Dalal, who will talk about his brother, who is being held in hostage and has been filmed being held as a hostage inside the Gaza Strip. So with that, I'd like to begin our program, and I'd like to invite Bret Stephens to please come to the front. So thank you very, very much. I hope I can be heard. Can I be heard clearly? For those of you that I haven't had the privilege of meeting, I'm Benjamin Anthony. I'll speak to you towards the conclusion of the event. I'm the co-founder of the Miriam Institute, and I want to reiterate all of Rosita Panini's notes of thanks. Thank you so very much, Rosita. This wouldn't have happened without you. And thank all of you for being here and giving of your time, and certainly special distinction to Dan Bartfeld for granting us this venue and for facilitating this. Bret, I invited you here because I am somebody who's followed you very, very closely over the years, learned from you, as I believe that everyone in this room has had occasion to do. You've spoken of late about a subject that's very, very dear to my heart and very concerning, which is the hatred of the Jewish people that is bubbling up and bursting out of what was to this point somewhat contained on college campuses. I want to start there, and then I want to go into elected office. Let's start with a question. You're a graduate of an esteemed university, University of Chicago. The worst Jew hatred seems to be coming out of the peer schools of the University of Chicago, the Harvards and the University of Pennsylvania's and the Cornells. And why is it happening there?
Well, I don't consider them peer schools. Look, this has been brewing for a long time. People are talking about anti-Semitism now, or in recent years. I've been worried about anti-Semitism for my entire professional career, and it became obvious that it was a major problem when I was living in Brussels after September 11th. One of the weird advantages of being a Jew named Stevens is that you're a spectator in conversations that are not intended for you. I think one of the reasons it's coming up in universities is that anti-Semitism has always been a hatred that has found a home as much in elites as it has in sort of mass sentiment. And we tend to think of, or there's a misconception that anti-Semitism is, there's the old saying, it's the socialism of fools. It kind of comes out of the fever swamps of the Charlottesville marchers or from other kind of dismal corners of public life. But there's always been a high-flown form of anti-Semitism. T.S. Eliot was an anti-Semite. Martin Luther was an anti-Semite. The German universities were stuffed with anti-Semites, and things have not really changed all that much since then. The real issue, I think, with the universities is that a set of ideologies that were not anti-Semitic on their face, but they were what I call anti-Semitic adjacent, became prevalent in academic life starting in the 1960s and 1970s, particularly this idea of anti-colonialism that Frantz Fanon, the Caribbean writer who wrote The Wretched of the Earth, popularized, and then with people like Edward Said, although he was much closer to an out-and-out anti-Semite. But these ideas took root without a kind of obvious direction of anti-Semitism, but found their way there. So some of the things that have worried me about American academic life is that concepts like privilege, for example, if all of your kids who are in colleges have been told to check their privilege, right? These are concepts that on their face are not anti-Semitic, but when you stop to think about it, you think, well, inevitably it's going to lead in that way, because if what we used to call success in America, merited success, becomes a form of unmerited privilege, then any group that has had outsized success in the United States is going to be a target. The racialization of discourse, which has been happening on universities for years now, which now comes down to people being told at DEI seminars at Stanford to identify as either white or black, also, again, not overtly anti-Semitic, but ends up shunting most American Jews, at least Ashkenazi Jews, into a category we ourselves would never recognize. I mean, my mother was a hidden child in the Second World War. She was hunted because she wasn't sufficiently white or Aryan as far as the Nazis are concerned. And now 2 generations later, her grandchildren are being told that they're white and therefore privileged and therefore guilty. And the final thing that's happening is a kind of a war on what you might call intellectual heterodoxy, of thinking for yourself. And Jews have a habit of thinking for themselves. It's maybe a bad habit, but we're impish and ironic, and we like to say no when everyone else says yes, and yes when everyone else says no. So these kind of anti-Semitic adjacencies are now sort of finding their target, but they've been looking for that target for decades. Now I think it's come out in a way that is only going to get worse. I think we are at the beginning of this crisis, nowhere near even the middle of it.
So growing up in the UK, I fell prey to a lot of anti-Semitism. Yeah. When I spoke about it in the US, people would say, well, of course, because there are many Muslims in the United Kingdom, or there's the Islamification of the United Kingdom. But I used to say, no, there's also centuries deep, old anti-Semitism that has now merged with those among the Islamic faith who are anti-Semitic, those who do preach that sort of hatred. What's happening on the campuses is this merging as well. This ultra-far left liberalism has merged with this far-right fundamentalism. How has that happened?
Yeah, so your comment reminded me of the definition of a British anti-Semite. It's someone who hates Jews more than is strictly necessary. It's funny. Come on. Look, there's an expression in French that the extremes touch, and so you have, on the one hand, a Islamism, which is in every sense fascistic, and in every other sense except for the Jew hatred, the opposite of what liberals and progressives claim to stand for. You know, how are trans rights going in Gaza these days? Probably not well. How about women's rights in Egypt? Not at all well. Anything that a progressive has ever stood for and would fight to, you know, the last, all gender bathroom for, the Islamists oppose. But on this one point, they found common ground, and it was always interesting when Bin Laden was alive that one of his favorite, the only Jew he seemed to like was Noam Chomsky, whom he would quote from time to time. In fact, if you go into any academic bookstore, either as I've been at the American University of Beirut or the American University of Cairo, you're going to find the works of Noam Chomsky and all of these people who are kind of his minions and acolytes. And they've found this very fruitful merger of the far left and the far right, which I saw on October 8th when I went and had a look at the protests that had been organized in the immediate wake of the massacres of October 7th. I was just eyeballing the people there, and I would say it was about 70% all but dissertation types from various universities from Columbia on up to people who are clearly of the Muslim faith, and they had merged together. And this is I think particularly toxic because you see this in Britain, large numbers of Muslims bring mass, and high-level leftists on universities bring influence. And those two things are a particularly toxic combination, which we Jews find difficult to counter.
So I want you to hit something that I think is very discomforting to Jewish people who are supportive of being Jewish and who are supportive of the state of Israel. And that is what we term the self-loathing Jews, because they're rife and rampant on the university campus. You just mentioned one, Noam Chomsky. Many people would give him that definition. If you disagree, feel free.
I dislike the term because
Tell us.
The problem with them is not their self-loathing. The problem is the excessive self-love. I mean, there is a kind of a bottomless narcissist at the heart of every Jew who makes it his task in life to speak ill of other Jews. And I mean, by the way, having debated these guys over the years, the amount of self-regard, the willingness to say, I'm one Jew and I'm going to tell you what to think about being a Jew, takes a level of chutzpah that only the Jewish people could produce. There's a reason why there is a wicked son who is called upon or spoken of at every Passover table.
So you wrote an essay called "The Three Falsehoods About Anti-Semitism and One Truth." Tell us about that. What were you driving at there?
Well, I think anti-Semitism is a largely misunderstood phenomenon in that, probably not to people in this room, but to, I think, most Americans, anti-Semitism simply means racism against Jews. But the racial dimension of Jew hatred is only one dimension among many. There is political anti-Semitism, there is religious anti-Semitism, there is an ethnic and cultural anti-Semitism. And in fact, the most potent form of anti-Semitism really is the political form. I mean, the term anti-Semite was coined by a man named Wilhelm Marr in the late 1870s, in order to start what he called the League of Anti-Semites. It was a political movement, right? And that's really important to understand, that the goal of the anti-Semite was to oppose the political interests of the Jewish people. What is the goal of the anti-Zionist? It's to oppose the political interests of the Jewish people. The other aspect about anti-Semitism that's often insufficiently or inadequately understood is the way in which it takes as its nature a kind of a conspiracy theory about the Jews. It's not just Jews are bad and have big noses or whatever. It's that Jews are conspiring against you. I mean, if I were asked to kind of come up with a one-sentence definition of anti-Semitism, I would say that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory that holds that Jews are uniquely prone to use devious means to achieve malevolent ends and must therefore be opposed by all means necessary, including the use of violence. I think that in one sentence comes closer to what anti-Semitism really is and how it's actualized, how it's understood, and how it has been understood actually long before Wilhelm Marr. So what did the Jews? The Jews killed Christ. Well, they didn't really kill Christ. It was Pontius Pilate who did it, but it was the Jews who got behind it. How did the bubonic plague happen? Jews were poisoning wells. What were Jews doing in 19th century Europe? They were swindling honest Europeans out of their patrimony by pretending to be European when in fact they were Semites, right? The whole term Semitic is to suggest that the German Jew is actually from the Middle East. What is the anti-Zionist conspiracy theory? It's that the Jews aren't really from the Holy Land. The Jews are from Europe, and they are conspiring to swindle Palestinians out of their own land. So until you understand the full range of anti-Semitism, you will fail to spot many instances of it. It's why so many people have a hard time recognizing that anti-Zionism isn't different from anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism is the essence of anti-Semitism.
So I want to hit just 2 or 3 more points with you. The first one is two-pronged, though. I'd like to know how geared up you think the Jewish community is here to fight anti-Semitism. That's the first. And the second prong of that is, do you think it begins by divesting from these campuses? Is it sensible to expect Jewish people to remove funding from university campuses? Is it sensible to expect Jewish people to stop sending their kids to the best campuses in America? How viable are these ideas?
So in 33 minutes, my column in the newspaper to which so many of you used to subscribe will appear, and it addresses exactly this point. So if you're curious, you might help pay my salary. Look, we have to start on October 7th. Israel and the Jewish people confronted their greatest tragedy since the Holocaust. On October 8th, we witnessed the celebration of that tragedy. We used to talk about September 12th Americans, people whose eyes had been opened by September 11th. We need to start talking about October 8th Jews. And October 8th Jews, first and foremost, know who their friends are not, right? Our friends are not in the social justice movement, where we have fellow traveled, or so many Jews have fellow traveled. Someone in this room put a Black Lives Matter a wall sign up or lawn sign up, I'm sure of it, right? And Black Lives Matter is putting up tweets with paragliders celebrating the, quote, liberation of Palestine. Our friends are not the university presidents and administrators who issued these mealy-mouthed, carefully parsed, equivocating statements on October 9th, 10th, and with a revision on the 13th when they started getting a little worried. We've discovered that there's a universe of people who we thought we were breaking bread with, and we're not. And so I think the goal of an October 8th Jew is to use that bracing clarity of knowing who your friends are not to act. I mean, it used to be 3 years ago, the slogan was defund the police. I say defund the academy, defund it. Do not support these campuses. On Stanford, every third building has a Jewish name connected to it. It's the Something Center, it's Blaustein, Greenberg, and so on, right? But at Stanford University, they've decided that when it comes to anti-Semitic speech, they believe in free speech. But when it comes to any other form of hate speech, they think it's hate speech. I'm perfectly fine with a standard for free speech, but I'm not fine with a double standard for free speech. And that's what you have now. So how do you act on it? Look, I'm looking at this room and I'm saying many of you, probably a majority of you, have in your personal lives and your careers taken incredible risks to achieve what you have achieved. You've dreamed of something new and you've put it all on the line. We have to start doing that in terms of the institutions that we want to create and that we want as our homes. I mean, you started off by talking about the University of Chicago. A brilliant academic named William Rainey Harper went to John D. Rockefeller and said, I'm going to start a research university modeled on the German, research universities in the middle of America, and you're going to give me $1 billion. And you know what John D. Rockefeller did? He gave it to him. And as a result, it's one of the last great universities in the world. We can do that. We can do that. There's no reason why we have to be limited to writing terrific but angry letters at the president of Harvard and saying, this is inadequate. We have to end this addiction to what used to be the tokens of prestige in our lives. And we have to invest in new concepts, new institutions, new media, new culture, new everything, and say they have to adhere to certain sorts of values. They don't have to be Jewish values, but they have to be classically liberal values. They have to be values in which every person, not the least of whom are Jews, are given a fair shake. And so this is, I think, the giant task of October 8th Jews. We built Hollywood, and then the rest of the world followed. We built investment banking, and the rest of the world followed. We built most of the great law firms, maybe this one, I'm not sure, and the rest of the world followed. So let's start building these new things. You're never cool if you want to join the cool kids table. You're only cool when you join your own effing table, and then people kind of notice that you're the coolest kid in class.
So, penultimate point. Not penultimate.
So that was the anti-penultimate question. Now the penultimate one.
Penultimate question. Many people are deeply concerned that what happens on the university campuses finds its way into the halls of legislation. And it seems to be that that's happening, and it seems to be that that's happening in a more truncated fashion than previously. How does we combat that? And what are the implications of it not being combated for the Jewish community? I've faced and lived with political anti-Semitism in the UK. I was amazed to see it take root and branch here. But in the UK, we recognize it. I'm not sure Americans are so quick to recognize it.
Look, I think actually here there's, and I hate to say this because to Jewish crowds, it repays you to be as depressing as possible. There are sources of optimism. One source of optimism is that in spite of the vast anti-Semitic world that we are familiar with because it's happening on the campuses that we knew as younger people, there's this big philo-Semitic world. I'm going up I just spoke at Vanderbilt and USC, and then I go up to Amherst College later this month. But no one has ever said, Bret, we'd like you to go talk at the University of Nebraska, right? 70,000 odd people, or any of these great public institutions where I would bet you would find a mindset that is really disposed to support Israel, because to normal people, you don't have to explain the difference between the aggressor and the victim. You don't have to explain the difference between wanton aggression and just retribution. You have to be an intellectual to fail to see that core moral distinction or recognize that the question of who started it is a material moral question. So we are not doing nearly enough to reach out to constituencies that are our friends. I mean, the only ones we are aware of are evangelical Christians, and I think a lot of Jews feel very uncomfortable with it for reasons I think are kind of ridiculous. I think it's a great thing. But to what extent have we reached out to Asian Americans? It's a very profoundly, fundamentally sympathetic constituency. I don't think we've done anything, is my guess. Flyover country America, we ignore just as so much of America ignores. We haven't gone abroad and tried to do this. Years ago, I was at synagogue in Cleveland, and it was kind of a synagogue, older crowd. There was this one young Chinese woman who was there, sort of introduced herself. She was from Shanghai and she was getting a degree at Case Western. I said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, I won't try to imitate her accent, but she had a thick accent, but she said, "Oh, all Chinese people know Jews are the smartest in the world." And I said, "Oh, come on, that's a terrible misconception." And she looked at me very sternly, like, "What's wrong with you?" And she said, "No, Nobel Prize in Economics, 57% Jewish." Or so. I think it's astounding. Chemistry, and she went down the line of Jewish intellectual achievement. Half of all grandmasters, a third of the math prize winners, and so on. And then she said, "Everyone in China knows this." And I thought, I didn't know that. So there are some billion-odd Chinese people who are potentially well-inclined towards us. What do we do about it? Now, unfortunately, the government of China is issuing, anti-Semitic propaganda these days, but there are people out there who, for profoundly mysterious reasons, seem to like us. And maybe we should be reaching out to them instead of engaging with, fruitless and tepid debates with morons and bigots at Ivy League campuses.
Yeah. Right after you, we're going to Zoom with Amir Tibon,
whom I just saw.
who we just saw.
Yeah.
Richie, by the way, if you can get that organized for us, make sure that Amir's ready to go. But Amir Tibon is an incredible story. The people here will hear his story and the story of his father. But of course, what it begs the question of is, what about Israel? Some people are thinking that Israel's been brought to its knees. They're wondering whether it's a safe bet that once it was, all these types of questions. Tell us where Israel is for the Jewish community, the Jewish world.
Well, Amir will have a deeper view than I can offer. But look, Israel, for all the threats it faces, has two forms of wealth which are priceless and irreplaceable, and that few other countries have. It has human capital, talent, ingenuity, go-gettingness, effortfulness, and it has social capital. It has trust, patriotism, a sense of personal responsibilities towards the public good. You look at Russia, when they had conscription, a couple million Russians fled. You look at Israel, when October 7th happened, there were guys dropping careers in Melbourne and Chicago and New Jersey who didn't have to serve. Who didn't have to serve, who were jamming El Al flights to join their old units. It's what ultimately gives me faith in the state of Israel. The government, the screw up is colossal. And it has reasons that owe to, I think, the short-sightedness and the selfishness of its rulers. But in Israel, at least you have a people that is vastly better than its government. And I'd rather have a people better than its government than a government better than its people. This is why I think in the long term, Israel is going to survive this moment. It's going to persevere and it's going to thrive.
So we're going to move on with the evening if we can. I just want to do another sound check. Can everyone still hear me? All the way at the back, wonderful. And Amir Tibon is with us now. Amir, can you hear me and can we hear you more importantly?
So I can definitely hear you. And
we hear
I
you
hope
clearly.
Everyone in the audience can hear me. And I want to thank everyone who came and especially send a big hug to my dear family, the Mir family who is in the audience. I love you guys.
Where are they? Hi. Hi to the family. Right. So Amir, thank you so much. It's of course the middle of the night over there in Israel. You're not at home because you are in Mishmar HaEmek Kibbutz in northern Israel, having been essentially evacuated there because there's a terrible of a terrible rampage that took place on October the 7th. We've divided this Israel segment of the evening, Amir, into three parts. One is that of salvation, but not unbridled happiness, of course, yours being the story of salvation. Then we're going to learn from Doron about the family members of his family that were murdered. And then we're going to hear from somebody whose brother is being held hostage inside the Gaza Strip still today. I really just want people to hear from you. Tell us about your story. Why were you living in Nahal Oz? And what happened on October 7th that changed the life of your family?
So first of all, I want to send a big hug to all of the members of my extended family today, the family of people from the area that we call Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope. And those who have right now family members in the hands of the enemy. And we're fighting for you. I want you to know it. Nahal Oz is a beautiful community located very, very close to Gaza. I mean, essentially, it's the closest place in Israel to Gaza. It's not a settlement or a disputed part of the country. It was founded in 1953 by a group of young, idealistic Israelis, 18 and 19-year-olds, in the midst of their military service, who were sent at the time by the government of David Ben-Gurion with a mission to create a new community directly on the border with Gaza. Ben-Gurion had a belief that the borders of Israel will only be secure if, alongside military bases, there will also be civilian lives and communities on those borders. He believed that in order to protect the border, the tank and the gun will not be enough. You also need the school and the clinic and the farmers. And that's how Nahal Oz was founded. I moved there personally in the year 2014, almost a decade ago. Back then, in the summer of 2014, there was a war between Israel and Hamas that lasted for 50 days. And Nahal Oz, during that war, was officially the most bombarded place in the state of Israel. It is so close to Gaza that it is not protected by Iron Dome because the interceptor does not have enough time to calculate the route of the mortar and the rocket before it lands in Nahal Oz. When there is a siren in Nahal Oz, you have 7 seconds to seek shelter. So you have to be able to run. And I was covering that war as a reporter. I was living in Tel Aviv at the time with Miri, my wife. And I wanted to go and see this place, the most bombarded place in the entire country. And I don't know what I was expecting, maybe some really rough and gray and cruel place. And I found myself visiting a beautiful, serene paradise that, yes, is located directly on the border with Gaza, but really is breathtaking. And it's hard for me to describe it in words, but I know Benjamin has visited me there in the past, and I don't see his face right now, but I'm sure, you know, the memories come to his mind as well. Nahal Oz is a resilient small community, just under 500 people, who have been holding this place, marking the border with their feet, raising their children there for decades now. During that war in 2014, there was a tragedy in the community. A 4-year-old child was killed by a mortar launched by Hamas toward the very end of the war. His name was Daniel Tregerman. At the time, his picture became very famous all over the world. Beautiful young child. And as a result of that, a lot of young couples, young families decided to leave the community. And Nahal Oz, like other communities on the border with Gaza back then, the end of 2014, you know, the communities were eager for young couples, young families to move in. Miri and I, we were a young couple living in Tel Aviv, no children at the time. And like a lot of young couples in the city, we used to have these conversations that one day in the future, when we have a family, maybe we'll move to a smaller place, you know, place with more sense of community, a kibbutz or a moshav, if you know a little bit the type of communities we have in Israel. And it was something we used to talk about, but I don't know if we were serious about it. But then the war ended, and I knew that this beautiful community that I had visited several times as a reporter was eagerly looking for young people to move. Miri is a brave and adventurous and very, very Zionist woman. And a month after the war was over, she came with me to Nahal Oz to look for apartments in the kibbutz. At a time when people were driving out, leaving, we were driving in. We said we want to come and live here. We didn't know if it would be a long-term commitment. I mean, you know, we were young, we were idealistic. There was also a political component to it. Nahal Oz and most of these communities on the border with Gaza are more affiliated with the left-wing liberal side of Israeli politics. And as a young secular, liberal, left-leaning couple, we felt it was a commitment to strengthen this community at the time. And so we just came there. We just did it. We were, I think, maybe the first or the second couple to move in after the war. And over the next few years, we watched the community experience amazing growth. I mean, one by one, families arrived looking for the same things that we were looking for and staying for the same reasons that we stayed, which was the very strong sense of community and togetherness. I believe one of the biggest problems in the world today is loneliness. I think people feel alone in many places, especially in more modern Western society. There's a strong sense of loneliness. When you live in Nahal Oz, you're never alone. You're part of a community that always hugs you and always looks out for you. This was very evident during the COVID epidemic. You know, I think people in big cities back then felt very, very lonely, whereas in the kibbutz, we were able to support one another and retain the strong sense of community life that is so important to us. We got married in Nahal Oz in 2016, a ceremony in the pool of the kibbutz, which is really so ridiculously close to the border with Gaza. It's unbelievable. We did our wedding there back then. And Benjamin was there. We had 400 guests, which is considered a small wedding in Israel. And the more significant decision than moving there at the time was a decision we took at the end of 2020 to come back there, because in between, there was a 3-year window when I was the Washington, D.C. correspondent for Haaretz, the newspaper that I write for. Donald Trump got elected at the time as your president. It was a big story. I don't know if you remember it. And the newspaper asked me to go to Washington, D.C. to cover the madness that was going on there. And so, you know, we lived for 3 years in the U.S. Our first daughter, Galia, was born in the U.S. And then we came back to Israel, and we made, I think, the most important decision of our lives up to that point, which was the decision to go back to Nahal Oz, to go back to this community that we loved so much, and to raise our children over there, you know, less than a mile from Gaza. Carmel, our second daughter, was born already in the kibbutz, and I can tell you, my 2 daughters, until the morning of October 7, had the most beautiful and happy childhood anyone can imagine in this kibbutz on the border. Yes, from time to time, there were sirens and rockets and mortars, and we had to run with them to the bomb shelter or to the safe room. You know, in every home in our communities, there is a room built of concrete, strong material that is able to withstand a direct hit by a rocket. And most families, including us, that's where you put the kids to sleep at night. So if there is a rocket alarm at 6 in the morning, the parents run to the children and not the other way around. The children can just stay in bed. But they really had a very, very happy childhood there. They loved the kindergarten in the kibbutz, where every day they would, you know, the educational staff would take the kids for walks in the small shaded alleys of the kibbutz, and they would go and see the cows and the donkeys. And, you know, when they learned about the fruits that we eat on different holidays, they didn't see pictures of those fruits or, you know, like a bag from the supermarket. They went to pick those fruits with their hands and feel them with their hands. We were living in a very, very special place. And yes, it came with challenges. We took those challenges upon us. We knew there was always a risk of war breaking out. We knew there was always a risk of, you know, mortar fire, rocket fire. From time to time, we had to just, you know, shove the girls in the car and drive away for a few days if a real war broke out. And we would stay with relatives, because it's not a place for children to be when there is a war. And yet none of that was ever enough to discourage us from living there and raising our children there and believing in Nahal Oz. When we went to bed on the night of October 6th, it was a Friday, our level of confidence in the state of Israel and the Israeli military was 100%. You cannot live in Nahal Oz if you don't trust the state and the military 100% to protect you, because you know, and we were never naive about this, you know that on the other side of that border fence, there are thousands of people who wake up every morning wanting to kill you and your children. We never had any doubt about that, okay? We were not naive about who is Hamas and the Islamic Jihad and the other terror groups in Gaza. Sadly, I will say we were naive in our complete trust of the government and the military to protect us. And that collapsed over our heads on the morning of October 7, when we woke up to a very heavy barrage of mortars and rockets. It was 6 a.m. And the first thing we heard really on that day was a whistle. When a mortar is about to fall and explode, it goes something like this. And then there is this boom, and the Amiri woke me up. She said, Amir, we have to run to the safe room, to the girls. So we ran, and we were not so excited about it. We've been through this over the years. It's something that when you live on the Gaza border, you kind of get used to it, and it happens from time to time. There's even a little bit of, humor involved. On that Saturday night, there was supposed to be a celebration in Nahal Oz, 70 years to the foundation of the kibbutz in October 1953. From October 53 to October 23. And that Saturday evening, there was supposed to be a celebration in the pool, and Galia, our oldest daughter, was supposed to dance on the stage. And so when we were waiting in the safe room, the first thing we tell each other is, she did really good in the rehearsal, but she's not going to be on the stage tonight, because we realized something was starting to happen. But it didn't take long for us to understand this was a different kind of event. This wasn't one of those mornings in which we just wait for, a break in the mortar fire when they have to reload, and we just put the girls in the car and we drive away. This was a different kind of event. We started hearing automatic gunfire. First, it was a bit distant in the fields of the kibbutz, and then it got closer and closer until we basically heard gunshots right outside our window. Not down the street, not nearby. Literally a person standing with a gun outside our window and shooting into our house, into our living room. Trying to break our door, we heard shouting in Arabic. I understand Arabic, so I understood what was being said. It was tactical maneuvers, tactical orders by a commander to his soldiers. And we realized that Hamas had broken into the community, and that now our lives were really, really in danger. Our girls were waking up at that point, 3.5-year-old Galia, 1.5-year-old Carmel, and they're waking up in a dark room. The electricity had fallen down, and they're asking, can we go out to play? I mean, it's a Saturday morning, they just woke up, they know there's no kindergarten, they want to go out and play. And we have to tell them, no, you can't go out to play now. It's dangerous outside. So they ask, can we have breakfast? And we have to tell them, no, we don't have food here and we can't go out. It's dangerous outside. We did have water. Miri had the wisdom to bring water into the safe room before we just locked ourselves from the world. And the most difficult thing was telling them that they have to be quiet. They cannot make any noise because our doors of the house were locked. The windows were shut. The shades were rolled down. And we were hoping that maybe, if there is no sound at all, the cell of 5 Hamas terrorists armed from head to toe that were standing outside our window at that point would think there's nobody in the house. So we just told the girls, you have to be absolutely quiet, not a word. I don't know until today how to explain it, but they just understood and they cooperated. They were silent for the next 10 hours while we were waiting in the dark, hearing gunshots all around us, into our house, on our windows, on our doors, all over the neighborhood. And we're looking at, the WhatsApp group, the text messaging group of our neighborhood, and we see what's happening. Everybody's writing the same thing. The terrorists are here. They're outside my door. They're outside my house. They are inside my house. They're trying to break into my safe room. At first, we thought it was a local event. We thought there was a Hamas cell that had broken into Nahal Oz, and in a few minutes, the military will come and take care of it. Even then, we believed in the state and the military to come and rescue us. It took us a long time to understand what was happening. This was not a local incident. This was happening all over the Gaza border area, in dozens of kibbutzim and towns and military bases. The military had been surprised and overrun by the terrorists, and we were alone. I can say that those were the 11 most difficult hours of my life. And at various times, we thought we were just going to die in there. And we were saying our goodbyes in English in order not to upset the girls and not to get them, excited. But speaking to each other in English, we really said goodbye. We said goodbye to our families. And yet, as difficult as this experience probably sounds to you, I want you to know we are the fortunate, lucky ones. We got out of there alive. Inside our kibbutz, there was a small team of police, not even officers, just young policemen who were monitoring in the week before October 7 the demonstrations that Hamas was holding on the border fence every night. And this small group, 10 police guys, together with 3 very, very brave men from our local security team of the kibbutz, they fought for hours like lions against 100 Hamas terrorists who just swarmed our community. 13 against 100. We talk about 1948, the myth of the foundation of Israel, the few versus the many, me'atim mul rabim. On that day in Nahal Oz, it was not a myth. It was just the reality. 13 against 100. They did everything they could, but they could only do so much. I mean, in our neighborhood, there was a battle right outside our window. One of the terrorists, I later saw the bodies, had an RPG loaded, aimed at my neighbor's house. In other parts of the kibbutz, the results were different. People were murdered, people were kidnapped. We have right now in Gaza, from my community, an 8-year-old girl and her 14-year-old sister in the hands of Hamas. Many people in Israel on that morning just woke up, realized what was happening, and without waiting for orders, without waiting for someone to tell them what to do, took whatever weapons they had in their hands and rushed down south to help. One of those people was my father and my mother with him. Both of them over 60, grandfather and grandmother, drove in their vehicle from Tel Aviv, which is an hour and 15 minutes, to try to get to our community and to try to save us and other people. Along the way, as they were driving down and they were really alone on the road, they saved lives, and I'm extremely proud of them. This story, it's been told. I don't want to repeat everything. You can watch on 60 Minutes. It was told in other places. But the important thing I want to say, and this connects to what Bret said a few minutes ago, is that on that morning, we saw a complete failure of the Israeli government and the military. And right now we're at war. My brother is an officer on the front line. Many of my neighbors are there fighting. And so right now we're busy fighting and defeating Hamas, but I will never, ever forgive, never, ever forget anyone who was involved in this failure, starting from the highest level with the prime minister and going down to the relevant military commanders and intelligence people. They failed us on that morning. But the spirit of the many, many people of Israel who went out to fight that day, to me, is more important right now. And, my parents' story is part of it. The fact that they just drove down there, my dad with a pistol, they saved a young couple that ran away from the massacre at the music festival, literally just put them in their car and took them to safety. My father joined a battle on the road to our kibbutz, took a gun from an officer that was killed, shot to death a terrorist, maybe 2, and then evacuated 3 injured soldiers. And my mother, under bombs, under fire from Hamas, evacuated those 3 wounded soldiers to the hospital. And my father turned around and eventually made it to our kibbutz with a buddy of his, Israel Ziv, a 67-year-old retired paratroopers general. These stories, there were so many of them on that day. Okay, our story became a little famous, but there were so many stories of heroism that day, of people who did not wait for instructions, did not wait for anyone to tell them where to go or what to do, and just decided to go there and try to save lives, and some of them did not come back. One of the things I've been doing since October 7th, since I won my life back in a way, because I was sure for many hours I was not going to make it alive. One of the things I've been doing is going to visit the families of soldiers who died in the battle for our life. And there was one story about a team of 5 officers and soldiers from Maglan. It's a special forces unit that all of them were at home on that morning. Each one of them lives in a different part of Israel. And they communicated, they decided to all join forces at a certain junction in southern Israel, and they just drove toward our kibbutz to try to save us. On the road to Nahal Oz, they were ambushed by a Hamas cell, because Hamas knew that reinforcements would have to come on this road, and they waited for them. There was a gunfire, there was an ambush. And of these 5 guys, 3 died and 2 were injured. This is the group of soldiers that when my father later arrived, he took the gun from one of them and then evacuated the 2 wounded guys to safety. And I told their families, the families of the guys who did not come back, how much I admire what they did that morning. You know, they did not wait for anyone. They said, we're going there and we're trying to save lives right now. And they fought and they killed Hamas terrorists and they opened the road. They neutralized this ambush, they opened the road, and then more forces could come and save our lives. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at a major failure and a major crisis in our confidence and trust, and at the same time, amazing stories of heroism and courage under fire. And then the last thing I want to say, there's a big question hovering above every conversation of this kind that I've been doing in recent weeks, and I've been doing a lot, you know, interviews and briefings to Jewish communities, which is the question of whether or not we will go home. And to that, my answer is very clear. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how. We want to go home. After everything that happened, most of our community wants to go back to Nahal Oz. But in order to go there, we need to regain the trust and the confidence that have been broken. You know, we had a contract with the state of Israel. Everybody who lives in the Gaza border area had a contract. The contract goes like this. We protect the border. We mark the border with our lives. Just by being there, we are the border of Israel. We protect the border. The state of Israel protects us. And we held our side of the bargain heroically for years under mortar fire and you know, the threat of anti-tank missiles on our cars and many, many things that nobody needs to know. We held our side of the bargain. On October 7, the state of Israel did not commit to our agreement, did not honor our agreement. And in order to bring back the trust and to bring back the agreement, the first and most important thing is to deliver security and to bring back our people. To bring back our people who are now in the hands of Hamas. Without this, trust will be very, very hard to build. But yes, we want to go back home, and we want to have all of our people who are now in the hands of the enemy come back with us. And I believe we will. I believe we will. When people ask me, who will win this war? I have a sentence, and Bret, I'm sorry, I'm you know, causing a little you know, spoiler to your upcoming column. But there's one sentence for me that defines victory. A year from today, I put my 2 girls in kindergarten in Nahal Oz, and I drive off to work in Tel Aviv with peace of mind. If I can do that, Israel has won the war. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Amir, I just want to thank you, and I want everybody to understand that we have our next 2 guests, and we'll be adjourning at 7:30, and I want to thank you so very much for being with us. Nahal Oz needs help. Everybody here has a card on their chair. You can scan this, you can donate to it, you can invest directly through the Miriam Institute to Nahal Oz to rebuild that community so that Amir, his family, and other families like him can live their lives in peace and security knowing the basic aspects of day-to-day life that all of us take so for granted. So please consider doing that. Please do it now. Do it during the course of this evening. And Amir, I want to thank you. Thank you so very much. And we appreciate you speaking to us in the middle of the night over there in Israel. And may you know no more sorrow or challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. So ladies and gentlemen, we're moving along with our program because we said we wanted to hear from three different types of Israelis who've gone through this. We're joined here by Doron. Doron has flown in here. It bears mentioning that Israelis don't want to be in America right now, despite what they've gone through. Israelis want to be in Israel with their family. I know
That's true.
You're something of a rock for your family.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go straight to it. We only have limited time, and everybody here can congregate around you informally afterwards. Doron, your brother was murdered, your nephew was murdered, and 2 members of your extended family were murdered. Tell us what happened to your family that day, and tell us what your goal is being here in America. And the other thing I'd like you to speak on is, quite frankly, how do you manage to stay upright and focused and calm the way that I've noted about you since I met you earlier today?
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming here today. My brother Ofir Libshtein was the mayor of Sha'ar HaNegev, and he lived in Kibbutz Kfar Aza since 1998, for 25 years. He came there because of love. He found his wife over there. She was born in the kibbutz, and my brother was a man of peace. He believed in peace. He invested his life in peace. He created an industrial center, Arazim, for 10,000 people. They were supposed to start building it 2 weeks ago. He invited Arab from Gaza to his house, to his kibbutz on a weekly basis, so they will know us and feel good with us. And he had a vision of solar panels between us and Gaza, so they will have electricity and they will have something to lose before they fight and send missiles to us. On Saturday at 6:30, he had a call and a text message that terrorists are entering the kibbutz from the air. He immediately ran to the safe room in the kibbutz to take the weapon. You need to understand, we are not allowed to hold the weapon at home. And he took the weapon, came back to meet the terrorists, but on his way, just near his house, below an olive tree, what a symbol, he saw 2 trucks with tons of terrorists driving towards him. He started to shoot, but there was a lot of people that shoot him, and he died at that moment. They continued, and after few houses, they saw his mother-in-law, Bila, and she was just going out to take her phone, and they killed her. Her husband, Amos, saw her getting shot, called his son and asked that someone will come to see what happened. And his wife, Ayelet, ran and saw that Bila was already dead, stayed with Amos for the next 30 hours in the safe room. And in the morning, 7:15, we already had 2 people that died in our family. The people from the municipality, they called Ofir again and again. They know that when he's there, he's saving them. The same thing was done through us. I called him, all the family, and also the president of Israel. Bougie Herzog, and many GNF chairmen and many people called him at that moment. Usually he will answer everyone and tell them it's all okay, but this time it wasn't. They asked his son to go outside and see what's happening because his phone is showing that he's in the same place for too long. His son Aviv, who's 22 years old, just finished an elite army service, went out under fire, and he saw his father below the olive tree. He took his weapon, went into the safe room to guard his wife, his Ofir's wife, his mother, Vered, and the three kids, Idan and Uri. So together there were three kids, and Vered, same, for 30 hours in the safe room. At that time, they have another child, Nitzan, who lives in a young building that is like 300 feet from their house. And he just moved there. He's 19 years old. He built his new house, and he's calling and he's afraid, so afraid. When he was 7 years old, he was playing basketball and bombs went nearby him, and he had a trauma. When he was 14 years old, there was an explosion of this trauma, and he had to leave the kibbutz and live in the north for 4 years. And now he's back and he's living the trauma again. And he's asking his mom, what about dad? And she said, don't worry, focus on yourself now. And he says, I know that he died. And he asked, what about my grandmother? And she's dead. And he's begging for the army to save him. But there is no army. We're talking about early morning, and it will take 6 hours until the army will enter the kibbutz. The rest of the team, only 12 in the kibbutz, civilians like us who are guarding the kibbutz in this kind of situation, died at the safe room when they went to bring the weapon. So the terrorists knew exactly where it is. They were waiting for them, and they killed them over there. So there was no one to protect the kibbutz. And most of the terrorists, and there were 200 of them in this kibbutz, went to the place where all the young people were. I'm talking about people from the age of 19 to 23. In our family, we had 2 members. One is Nitzan and one is Neta. Neta was the son of the brother of Vered, wife of Ofir, my brother. So Neta lives there with his fiance. They are only 22 years old, officers in the army. And the terrorists are going into the house, shooting everything. And when I say shooting, they shoot with so many weapons. They destroyed the whole neighborhood, and they are running to the safe room, but the safe room door can be opened from outside. So the terrorists open the door and throwing grenade, and Neta is jumping on the grenade and save his fiancée, and she was staying there behind his body below the bed for 4.5 hours until she was saved. Now Nitzan knows that Neta died, his grandmother died, his father died. He's in trauma. And people are telling him, and he's texting family, his brother, his mother, other people, and people are telling him, hold the door because they can throw grenades. So he's holding the door, and at 11:30, they are shooting the door from outside, and the door is not bulletproof. Doors of safe rooms are not supposed to protect you from bullets, and one bullet went in and He was shot in his leg, and he was guided how to stop the bleeding. And it took another 3 hours of him communicating with his mom and with his cousin, who's a doctor, that told him what to do, and with his brother, and he's begging, please rescue me. The army is already there. We're guiding them exactly where it is. They had no idea where are the buildings, who's in the building. So I was part of the WhatsApp groups. So I knew exactly what is happening. And the heart cry, because people are begging. They're saying, they are in my living room. They're shooting. Please help me. Come to my house. And even when the army went in, few units went in. Maglan, Duvdevan, other parts, 13, Yassam. And in some cases, they fought one against the other because they didn't know who was there. And we couldn't guide them to get there, but we really sent them maps. We told them exactly who's where. And at 2:30, the phone died. Either the battery or maybe the army shut down all the connection. And from that point until 4, we had no idea what is happening with Nitzan. At 4, a commando unit from Duvdevan went in. They saw 4 terrorists in his living room. They killed them. And they said that he was not in his room. So we assumed that he went out. Around 8 p.m., like 4 hours later, they told us that he was rescued, and in one of the hospitals, we sent his friends and our family members to all the hospitals in Israel to wait for him, but he never arrived. It took us another 12 days to realize what happened to him, and we know only the fact. I went there 4 days later and I searched for him. I couldn't find him in the kibbutz under fire. And on Wednesday, 12 days later, we buried Ofir, my brother. It took a while to bury him because the bodies were left in the kibbutz for 4 days. There was fire for 3 days and they were there. The terrorists kind of controlled the kibbutz for another 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. On Tuesday, they took all the bodies out after 4 days outside and they put everything in one truck. So it took another week until they identify each body by DNA, and we could bury Ofir on Wednesday. On Thursday morning, we got the message that they found Nitzan and he died also. What happened to us in those 12 days is that we were all under one team called Rescuing Nitzan, doing everything we could to rescue him. And up till now, we have no idea what happened to him. They don't even know when they took the body out. So this family of us lost 4 members. For Vered, Ofir's wife, it's her mother, her husband, her son, and her nephew in one day. We had to bury Nitzan and his grandmother on the same day, Friday, after Ofir was buried on Wednesday and Neta on Tuesday. But the day after, on Saturday, she rented a house near her sister in Moshav called Matan, near Kfar Saba, and their friends from the kibbutz, the people who lost their house and their friends and their family members, came to help her build a new house. By the end of the day, they were sleeping in this house, and a week later, she hosted, like always in the kibbutz, 50 kibbutz members for barbecue. And she was saying, the life force is stronger than anything. And last Friday, we've done a big event. I've organized it for the kibbutz members, and we gave them some instructions of how to move from grief to building the kibbutz, for how to deal with trauma, how to deal with uncertainty. This is the situation right now. We were talking about it, Amir, about their lost faith in the army, in the government, also in humanity. They couldn't believe that someone can act like that, even Hamas. It wasn't even the worst case scenario. You see, the army had the worst case scenario that maybe 50 terrorists will go into 2 kibbutzes and kill 40 to 80 people. That was the worst case scenario, like Armageddon. And look what happened. 3,000 terrorists went in with cars and with motorcycles. They killed 1,400 people. You know, the US is 250 times Israel. It's like 9/11 was 350,000 dead people in one day. The Israelis, we know, each and every one of us, and it's true for you also, we know someone who was killed that day. We have 4 in our family. We know someone who's there right now in Gaza. And we know that we must bring them back, and we know that we must free Gaza from Hamas. But we don't have a picture for what will happen next. How can we go back there and live there? How can we gain faith? What is the ideal solution or the best case scenario? We know everything about the worst case scenario now. But what is the best case scenario? What could be a good solution? Those are things that we are asking questions about. I can tell you that immediately Bret, his wife, wanted to bury Ofir in Kfar Aza. It means that they want to come back, like Amir says. And they couldn't. We had to bury him temporarily in a different place and then move him when it will be secured. And I can share with you that they have plans and we are not waiting for the government. And the reason why I'm here is to ask for support for the people from the kibbutz, the individuals and the kibbutz itself, and to really share with you how we feel and to tell other people that are not in this room, because I see how you understand the situation, that it can happen everywhere around the world. It's not only Israel. And if we will not deal with it now, it will happen in London, in Paris, in New York, and in Los Angeles, and in Sydney, Australia, etc., etc. This is not just Israel. And we need to acknowledge that.
Doron,
Yes.
I want to thank you for being with us. Oh,
It's important to me that we will put one of the videos, even one.
just
Because-
one moment. I want to thank you for being with us, first of all. You're taking this message to Capitol Hill tomorrow, okay? We'll show the video after we adjourn. We'll put it on here. As we conclude, we have to wrap, I'm afraid. I
Okay. I will
apologize.
just say maybe
Yeah,
two
just
sentences about
please.
Ofir.
Yes.
is important. He was the mayor. He split his time into three. One is to take care of the quality of the life in the area. This is why he created startup houses in his village. This is why he created this industrial center, Arazim, for 10,000 people. This is why he invested in the relationship with the Palestinians for our quality of life. He wanted to live in peace and not in war. One. The second part of his dedication was for the community. He was the mayor and he took care of education and really brought tons of people. As Amir says, it's amazing. They were full and people were on waiting lists in order to live there. And even today, Benny Gantz, in his funeral, Ofir's funeral, says, I'm going to live there. And the president, a very good friend of Ofir, and many others share this vision. And the third part of his time, he was the Habonim Dror chairman. And he was building bridges between Israel and the diaspora. He had a different vision. He thought that we need Jewish people all around the world, and that will create their bonding. The Stand for Israel needs that someone will stand in small communities all around the world, and this is what he has done. He created 100 small communities that are strong, and Israel support them, and they support us. So if in the past, and we wanted everyone to come to Israel, his vision was we need strong communities all around the world that will support Israel and Israel will support them. And this is what he has done with tons of programs like Hallelujah and Hamsa, and he dedicated his life to that. And we need tons of people to continue his legacy. And I thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, our final speaker is not present. I'm not sure where he is, but I did say that I was going to be faithful to a particular timeline. Might go 5 minutes over it, but not more than that. I want to reiterate my thanks to Rosita Panini, the co-founder of the Miriam Institute, to Richard Offenbacher, our team member here, and to everybody who brought this evening about, of course, to our speakers. Thank you so very much to Bret Stephens, to Doron. And to all of you for giving your time and your attention to this subject. Certainly warranted your time and attention. And of course, none of this would have been possible without Dan Bartfeld. Thank you so very much, Dan. People should give Dan a round of applause for putting this to fruition. Just a couple of final thoughts. First of all, I hate fundraising. I'm not a fundraiser, but I am here appealing for funds. You've heard about causes that require your financial investment. It will go to the things that all of us take for granted. Amir Tibon is living on a mattress with his family in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek in northern Israel. He was not able to dial in early for a sound test because he's surrounded by other families who are living on mattresses in that same kibbutz. Doron's life has been torn asunder completely by way of the horrors that were wrought against us on October the 7th. And when we ask you to give more, to invest more so that we can help the civilians and the soldiers of the state of Israel, Doron is not an individual who comes to collect funds habitually. This is something into which he's been forced by way of horrific circumstances. So I'm asking all of you, please, all of you paid the $180 to come here today. We're very grateful for that. You know where the funding is going. It's going to the soldiers and the citizens of the state of Israel. But you can do more and you should do more. And I'm appealing to you, please, to do more and not to walk out of here and leave me picking up all of these donation cards afterwards. Please. It's against my nature to make such a direct appeal. But all of us have been found dealing with circumstances that we never thought we would have to face. The last couple of quick points that I want to say. is that the October the 7th massacre was the worst horror wrought against the Jewish people since the events of the Holocaust, but it certainly is not a Holocaust because the Jews are not the same Jews. The Jews will fight back, the Jews will prevail, the state of Israel will rise again, and the members of the Israel Defense Forces, I believe, have gone from something of a whimper to letting their roar be heard. They are currently encircling Gaza City, and I have total faith, having made those similar walks when I wore a uniform of the Israel Defense Forces as a combat soldier. I have total faith in their ability to push this through until victory. And I also call upon each and every one of you not to at any point tire from the work of letting your legislators, your elected officials, your public servants know of the importance that you assign to their continued support to the state of Israel, the people of Israel, and the soldiers of the state of Israel for as long as it takes until we get this job done. Hamas is a movement, is a terror organization, is a group of people that must be vanquished from the face of the earth. Nothing less than that. And all of you should be supportive in those efforts by way of pulling on the levers of power right here in the United States, unrelentingly until victory comes about. I also want to say one last thing about the soldiers, and then we will conclude. And by the way, there's coffee and cake and a dessert reception, and I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible informally afterwards, as does Doron. I have an older brother who nearly died as the result of an anti-Semitic attack. In 2020, he had to undergo a 4th liver transplant, and he wasn't finding a liver, and his anesthesiologist called me to tell me that he was in multiple organ failure. He told me that his lungs were failing, he was in kidney failure, he was one step away from heart failure, and some people in this room have heard this conversation, and therefore I would be wise to let him go, to stop pressing his medical team to assign medical treatment to him. This was just in 2020. And then that anesthesiologist said something to me that I think is apposite to this evening. He said to me, now, he might recover from the lung failure and he might improve from the status of kidney failure. And that was new to me. I'd never heard of such a thing. I actually thought, maybe some of you in this room thought the same thing, but I actually thought that when one reaches organ failure, that is the end. The organs don't recover, but actually there's a distinction between an acute failure and a chronic failure. And what I learned from that was failure doesn't have to be fatal. You've heard our speaker, Doron, and Amir speak about the failure of the Israel Defense Establishment, but failure doesn't have to be fatal. We're not seeing the death knell of the state of Israel here. We're not seeing the end of the Jewish state. We're not seeing the conclusion and the ending of the Zionist dream. We're actually about to see the Jewish people, in my opinion, move into their finest hour. And I believe that it will be summed up in the Talmudic phrase that we learn, which states, "Bamakom she'en anashim, ishtadel lihyot ish." In a place where there is no humanity, strive to be human. What befell Doron and his family has shown that Gaza Strip is a place where there is no humanity. And yet into that very place move forward our soldiers, who are our citizens, who are our sons and our daughters, mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters. And they will be accused of being war criminals. And by the way, mark my words, when the international legal community comes to prosecute them, they won't lay a glove on our soldiers because the allegations will be proven false and baseless. They're not war criminals, our soldiers. They're angels. Each and every one of them is an angel, marching where humans dare not tread. And they're worthy of your support. And the last thing I tell you is something deeply personal to me. When that anesthesiologist was on the phone to me as my brother couldn't get an organ and couldn't get transplants and was in multiple organ failure, my brother was in the room. And I could hear him croaking in the background. You know, there's an expression, a colloquial expression, a slang expression, somebody croaks. A person who's about to expire actually croaks. They emit a croaking sound. The soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, the people of the Israel Defense Forces, they're not croaking. What you're witnessing is the roar of the Lion of Judah. And you can put your faith in it, and you can support it, and you can invest in it. Because I can assure you, with sufficient determination, a little bit of hope, prayer, and the help of God, we will bring humanity to that place. And in time, not immediately, but in time, we will realize our most sincere prayer of knowing Shalom al Yisrael, peace over Israel, Israel the country, and Israel the people, including over you people right here in this Jewish community of Manhattan, New York. Don't be frightened, be certain we're about to step into our greatest moment as a people. Thank you, and we're adjourned.